The Los Angeles dawn seemed suspended in time. In the stuffy studio of Intrepid Pictures, illuminated only by monitors blinking like distant lighthouses, Mike Flanagan stared at the white rectangle on the screen like someone facing an abyss. The clock showed 3 in the morning, and each second felt like a step deeper into silence. Around him, piles of crossed-out notes, printed scenes, drafts with nervous arrows pointing nowhere. After the success of The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass, the weight of surpassing himself was almost physical, pressing his neck, locking his fingers. If you've ever faced a night like this, when the future seems like a dead-end corridor and every attempt echoes like empty sound, then you know that sometimes we need a voice to remind us who we really are. Subscribe and stay with us. Here we unveil the secret moments where great works are born not from success, but from despair transformed into art. Because some stories arrive whispering, and you'll want to hear every word. "What does the audience still fear today?" Mike murmured, and the question sounded like an echo with no wall to bounce off, dissolving into the dark. It was December 2021, and he had just signed a $1 million contract with Netflix to create 5 new horror projects. The world expected genius, but all he felt was a growing emptiness. The cursor blinked, indifferent, an ironic metronome of his own stagnation. That's when the air changed. First, an almost imperceptible tremor in the ceiling fixture, as if a cold current crossed the space through the walls. The monitors blinked together in a single pulse, and the studio breathed back a fine mist that had nowhere to come from. In the corridor beyond the half-open door, a figure crossed like a shadow that had decided to have weight of its own. Mike rose slowly, his heart racing, and took 2 cautious steps. The fog rose, unfolding familiar contours, a wide-brimmed hat, a robust silhouette, a cane positioned with British precision. Time seemed to adjust its focus, and there he was, Alfred Hitchcock, whole and impossible, as if the room were a screen, and he, the sharpest shot of all. "You freeze before the page, don't you, Mike?" The voice came with that dry and precise humor that had marked classic BBC interviews. Flanagan nodded without finding words, instantly recognizing the accent he'd heard in documentaries since adolescence. Hitchcock advanced a step, his cane marking tempo on the cold cement floor. "I've watched your works, you know," the master continued, stopping beside the messy table. "Hill House was masterful. You understood that true terror isn't the ghosts, it's the people who choose to see them. But now you're trapped in a snare I knew well myself." Mike instinctively stepped back, his back finding the cold wall. His heart raced. That voice, that unmistakable accent he knew from old documentaries was there. Real, impossible. "This isn't happening," he murmured, running his hands over his face. I'm having a nervous breakdown." "You're dead," Mike exploded, pointing with a trembling finger. "Died in 1980. You can't be here, no way. This is impossible." Hitchcock tilted his head, amused, and tapped his cane on the floor twice. The sound echoed through the room as if coming from far away. "Am I?" he asked with that British irony that cut like a blade. "Are you so pathetic that you can't understand dimensions, Flanagan? What kind of suspense producer are you?" Mike felt his blood freeze. The voice carried a cold disdain, but also something more, disappointment. As if the master was genuinely surprised by his disciples' limited imagination. "You've spent your entire career exploring haunted houses, ghosts, presences that cross veils," Hitchcock continued, taking a threatening step toward Mike. "But when faced with the impossible in your own skin, you become a frightened child. Am I wasting my time here?" The silence that followed was dense as lead. Mike could hear his own heart beating, could feel cold sweat running down his back. Logic screamed that this was madness, stress, lack of sleep. But there was something about that man's presence, the weight of his authority, the precision of each word, that made denial impossible. "You have 2 choices," Hitchcock said, stopping inches away. "You can keep thrashing against reality like a fish out of water, or you can accept that sometimes the world is bigger than your understanding can reach." "What will it be, Mike?" Mike breathed deeply, his throat rough, his hands still trembling. He closed his eyes for a moment, smelling English tobacco, hearing the heavy breathing of the man who shouldn't be there. When he opened his eyes again, there was a strange surrender in his voice. "Okay," he whispered, almost inaudible. "What trap?" "The trap of believing you need to surpass yourself by inventing something new." Hitchcock smiled, no longer with disdain, but with the satisfaction of a teacher who who finally sees his student understand the lesson. The modern audience has seen too many monsters, blood in profusion, effects that cost fortunes. The question isn't how to scare, but why should fear return now? Flanagan then confessed what gnawed at his dawns, the terror of repeating himself, of disappointing, of confusing noise with tension. He spoke of executives wanting more Hill House, of fan pressure, of the feeling that each new idea was a poorly disguised copy of previous ones. Terror, Hitchcock whispered, approaching the scattered storyboards, doesn't live in the scream. It lives in the silence that precedes it. In what you remove from the frame, not what you add. He touched an open drawing with the tip of his cane. Look at this scene. You drew too much light. Erase half and force the eye to complete it. In the soundtrack, replace the crescendo with total absence. Emptiness amplifies every step, every breath, every fabric noise. Mike followed the cane's tip like a student deciphering an ancient map. And the characters? How do you make the audience care when everything has already been done? Make them love something that can be lost, Hitchcock replied with cutting simplicity. When the audience recognizes the risk of losing what they love, fear takes root forever. It's not the demon that terrifies, it's the possibility of helplessness. In The Birds, I never explained why they attacked. The truth is, it didn't matter. What mattered was Melanie protecting the children. The phrase hung in the air like dust in backlight, settling on every object in the room. Mike closed his eyes for an instant, and something began to form. He saw a narrow hospital corridor, half-open doors, the barely audible sound of machines keeping someone alive. He saw a woman collecting recordings of her comatose husband's last breaths, trying to capture the exact moment the soul departs. He saw a child talking to voices coming through hospital ventilation ducts, voices of patients who should no longer be speaking. You want novelty, Hitchcock continued, but novelty isn't pyrotechnic brilliance, it's rigor in choice. Choose a fear your own body recognizes. Losing a child, forgetting a loved one's name, hearing someone calling from a room you know is empty. Film this like someone witnessing a secret, not like someone announcing a magic trick. The director placed his hand on Mike's shoulder with a weight that surprised him with its physical reality. Don't show the monster too early. Let the audience beg to see it. And when you finally show it, let it be different from what they expected, not bigger or more grotesque, more intimate, closer to what they recognize in themselves. Mike felt his skin crawl under the touch. What if I fail? What if after all this nobody gets scared? Hitchcock smiled, in that paternal and ironic way he used with nervous actors. Failure is inevitable, boy. What's optional is giving up. Cinema is a dark corridor. You never know which door will open, but you have to keep walking. I made Vertigo thinking it would be my end. Critics hated it. Audiences didn't understand it. Today they say it's my masterpiece. The master stepped back a few paces, and the fog seemed to obey the retreat, like a curtain pulled by invisible threads. One last thing, he said, already half dissolved in the penumbra. What you're about to create isn't just a series. It's a lament. A lament for all those who wait for someone to wake up, all those who talk alone hoping for an answer. Call it the House of Interrupted Dreams. And remember, true horror isn't dying, it's being forgotten. The silhouette became shadow. The shadow became a fold in the dark, and the fold became nothing. The studio recovered its familiar geometry. Screens resumed artificial brightness. The air returned to its usual temperature. Only a subtle aroma of English tobacco remained, and a low hum in the fixture, as if a musical note insisted on remaining. Mike stood still, hands suspended over the table, listening to absence like someone deciphering a coded message. Then he sat down and began writing by hand, without looking at the keyboard. Words came like dammed water finding a crack. Setting, intensive care unit, artificial respirators creating a mechanical symphony, cassette tapes marked with dates of last lucid days, a hospital wing that changes layout when visitors fall asleep in waiting chairs. He wrote about Sarah Chen, night nurse who discovers that some comatose patients whisper coordinates of places where they buried secrets. About families who sleep in the hospital with room doors open so the soul can find its way back. About letters arriving without senders, addressed to unconscious patients, with detailed instructions on how to prepare for the journey. He drew arrows connecting characters, cut scenes that explained too much, replaced orchestral soundtracks with amplified hospital sounds, IV drip, echo of steps in the corridor at 3 a.m., the electrical noise of machines that keep bodies functioning when souls have already departed. When the sun suggested a pale strip through the blinds, 30 pages were scattered like a map only he could read. Mike dozed with pen in hand and woke at 9 a.m., neck aching but mind crystal clear. He reread entire passages and didn't remember writing them, though he recognized the internal logic of each cut, each calculated silence. At 10 o'clock, he called Kate Siegel, his constant collaborator. "Kate, I need you to come to the studio now. I have something that will give you chills." An hour later, she was there, reading over his shoulder, and gradually silence took over the room. "Mike," she whispered, "this is different. It's like each page is a corridor I'm afraid to walk through, but I can't stop." In the following days, the Intrepid Pictures team gathered for a creative marathon that lasted 48 hours. Flanagan shared every detail of the vision: the corridors of Mercy General Hospital, a real location in Pasadena that had closed in 2019, lighting that should come only from medical equipment, soundtrack composed exclusively of sounds captured in real ICUs. Trevor Macy, his producer partner, initially resisted. "Mike, this is risky. Hospital, coma, suffering family, it's territory that might drive away the audience." But when Flanagan showed the first episode's script, something changed in the room's air. The team remained silent for 20 minutes after the reading. It wasn't the silence of boredom. It was the silence of someone who had just seen something they didn't know existed. "We'll film in January," Macy decided, "but I want every department to understand. This isn't conventional terror. It's a study about farewell, about what happens in the space between living and dead, between conscious and absent." Pre-production was meticulous as surgery. Flanagan insisted on hiring medical consultants who had worked in ICUs for decades. Dr. Elena Vasquez, neurologist from Cedars-Sinai, spent 3 weeks with the team, explaining hospitals' unofficial rituals, how nurses whisper to unconscious patients, how families leave personal objects to guide the soul back, how some doctors admit in private conversations to having heard things science doesn't explain. Casting was equally careful. Victoria Pedretti accepted the role of Sarah Chen after a single meeting. "I read the script and cried for 2 hours," she confessed. "Not from sadness, from recognition, as if Mike had written about something I always knew existed but never knew how to name." Filming began in March 2022 at the old Mercy General. From the first day, strange things happened. Equipment turned on by itself during dawn. Crew members reported hearing whispers from empty rooms. Victoria herself, in a later Rolling Stone interview, admitted, "There were nights I left the set with the feeling someone was following me through the corridors. It wasn't fear. It was as if someone wanted to make sure I understood the story right." The first season of The House of Interrupted Dreams premiered on Netflix in October 2022. In the first 48 hours, it accumulated 127 million viewing hours, an absolute record for a horror series on the platform. But numbers were only part of the story. What really impressed were the reactions. ICU nurses worldwide began posting on social media. Finally, someone showed what really happens here. Families who had lost loved ones in hospitals sent letters to Netflix, saying the series had named experiences they thought were unique to them. Dr. Raymond Moody, author of Life After Life, declared to the New York Times, "Flanagan captured something official medicine has ignored for decades. Consciousness continues present even when all vital signs suggest otherwise." Criticism was unanimous. The Guardian called it the definitive reinvention of psychological terror. The New Yorker dedicated a cover story to the phenomenon, titled "The Horror of Compassion: How Mike Flanagan Transformed ICU into Art." Stephen King tweeted, "I can't stop thinking about this series' corridors. Flanagan found the fear we didn't even know we had." But it was a specific review that made Mike pause. A veteran critic from Cahiers du Cinéma wrote, "There are moments in The House of Interrupted Dreams that recall the best of Hitchcock, not for technique but for understanding that true suspense is born from empathy." Flanagan films death like Hitchcock filmed love, as something simultaneously intimate and universal. Reading that line, Mike smiled. It was December again, a year after that dawn in the studio. He was alone in the same room, but now the silence seemed different. Not empty, but full of possibilities. He looked at the wall where he had hung a photo of the team on the last day of filming. Everyone smiling, exhausted, but with that shine in their eyes of those who had just participated in something special. On the table, an envelope had arrived that afternoon. Inside, a handwritten letter without sender. "Dear Mike, I watched your series with my mother, who has been in a coma for 6 months. In episode 4, when Sarah whispers the coordinate to the patient, my mother squeezed my hand. Doctors say it was reflex. I know it wasn't. Thank you for helping me understand she's still here. A daughter who learned to wait." Mike folded the letter carefully and stored it in a drawer where he collected similar ones. There were already more than 300. Then he turned off the lights, leaving only the lamp over the table. In the silence, for an instant, he had the impression of hearing a familiar voice whispering, "Perfect boy." Exactly like that. He stood listening to the emptiness for a few minutes, smiling in the dark. Outside, Los Angeles breathed its usual nocturnal breathing, but something had changed forever. A door had opened, and on the other side, stories waited to be told. And you, what did you think of this story? Have you ever felt a presence guiding you in a decision that changed everything? Have you ever been certain that someone special was by your side exactly when you needed it most, even if it seemed impossible? Perhaps mentors never really abandon us. Perhaps they just wait for the right moment to whisper direction. What moment in your life seems to have had invisible help? What advice would you have liked to receive in your most difficult hour? Leave your own story of unexpected inspiration in the comments, because in the end, we all carry voices that guide us. The question is, are we willing to listen?